tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico. We have seen some intensification here over the past several hours, steadily gaining in strength. We've seen those maximum sustained winds come up here throughout the day, and now Sally is sitting at maximum sustained winds of 60 miles per hour and likely to become a hurricane here as we head on into Monday in the beginning of the week. I want to take you to our MyRadar app where we can see the latest forecast track. It looks pretty similar to how it has been over the past, the weekend in general. You can see its path there, taking it across the tip of Florida. It's been hanging out in the Gulf of Mexico over the past 24 hours, gradually gaining in strength, and it is expected to make landfall on the northern Gulf of Mexico coastline here. That track, it's a pretty wide window of where we could see an exact landfall, but of course we never want you to focus on that because there are impacts away from the center, and this cone only accounts for the center of circulation, not the entirety of the impacts from the storm. So that's the number one reminder going into this. But we have some uncertainty with the track and maybe a little bit with the intensity as well. That's usually the harder factor to predict versus the track. But we got a unique setup with the synoptics of the atmosphere here that's made the path of this storm a little bit difficult to forecast for here. We have gained some clarity today thanks to those extra soundings and the hurricane hunters that have been flying through Sally today and for the weekend. And with that, we want to bring you those updates from the latest advisory out of the National Hurricane Center as of 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central. So the storm now sitting just to the west of Florida in the Big Bend area. You can see lots of showers and storms moving over the peninsula. We're getting a better visual idea of Sally as those bands move through the peninsula. Some very heavy rainfall continuing to fall over the peninsula of Florida. Key West, last night they had a 24-hour rainfall total of about 9 inches of rainfall. And if you've ever been down to the Keys and Key West, the Conch Republic, Duval Street there, very popular place, was flooded. Very difficult for cars to pass through there, and frankly shouldn't have been, but it's been a bit of a mess here for folks along the Florida Panhandle. So once again, going into that idea that focusing on the exact center of the path isn't necessarily the wisest thing to do, because these can have far-reaching impacts in terms of those outer feeder bands and the heavy rainfall and surge impacts that we expect for folks here along the eastern Gulf Coast and the northern Gulf Coast. But again, zooming in on this track, heading on into about Monday and Tuesday, it's going to get pretty hairy for folks here along the northern Gulf Coast from the Florida Panhandle back towards the coastline of Louisiana. So we're going to jump now into our graphics here, and I'm going to show you the latest path here where it might be a little easier to visualize the timing on this here going on specifically through the next couple of days in Central Time. So by Tuesday, we expect the storm to be inland, where it will quickly begin to weaken. But ahead of that, we do expect more intensification here heading into the overnight tonight into Monday for Sally to become at least a Category 1 hurricane. And the current forecast track has it reaching the threshold where we could see it reach Category 2 status. That's still not out of the question. That could be the case. Nonetheless, the impacts will be pretty similar, where we'll see very strong winds for folks here along the coastline. This is our fourth storm we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico this season. This same area was dealing with the threat of Cristobal back in June. I think actually a couple days before the season started, so end of May, early June. Then we saw Hannah go for folks along the Texas coastline, so still active in the Gulf of Mexico, but we got a bit of a break. Actually, that's wrong. 5 storms. I forgot about Marco that came through this area just a couple weeks ago, and then of course Laura. So now Sally to be the 5th storm in the Gulf of Mexico this season. So it's been an active one here, and folks I think are looking forward to the end of the tropical season that will be coming at the end of November. But the current path will take it inland somewhere in the neighborhood between central Louisiana coastline, the tip of the boot there, through the panhandles of Mississippi and Alabama, and again, that being the center of the storm, not the broader impacts of the storm. And then once it does so and makes its way inland, it will recurve out to the northeast. So for this reason, the window of time is closing, and we have warnings issued now. As of the 5 p.m. advisory, the area you see there in red under a hurricane warning, and that is going to go from, I'll read you the exact points here from the advisory, from Morgan City, Louisiana, out to Ocean Springs, Mississippi. So that's a pretty broad area. It does include the New Orleans metro area. To the west of that purple shaded area is a tropical storm warning. So that goes out from east of Ocean Springs to Indian Pass, Oh, sorry, that's on the east side. So that's going to go from the panhandle of Mississippi through the panhandle of Alabama and all the way for that first half of the Florida panhandle down to about Apalachicola, Port St. Joe area, if you're familiar with the tip there, and then eastward of that, tropical storm watch. But on the western side of this, for the Louisiana coastline, there is a tropical storm warning in effect from intracoastal city, Louisiana, to west of Morgan City. So folks here in a broad area across the region will need to keep their eyes on this forecast, because we are expecting some pretty widespread impacts, and the timing of Sally's approach is going to influence those impacts too. So some of that uncertainty will play into whether things continue to deteriorate going on into the middle part of the week as well, and how quick Sally will make its way into that northeasterly curve and continue to weaken along that path to depression, as we just showed you on the track. So going a little bit further, storm surge is a big concern for folks along the northern Gulf Coast, especially near that delicate coastline of Louisiana and Mississippi, namely because a lot of that area is maybe under sea level, or vulnerable coastline because of the marshlands that are out there. So including parts of Louisiana all the way out to Biloxi and the Mississippi-Alabama state line. Storm surge warning in effect for folks there. We do expect at this point the worst of the storm surge to be for folks that are near the mouth of the Mississippi River. That has increased from yesterday's forecast. We're now expecting the potential for 7 to 11 feet of storm surge, which would mean 7 to 11 feet of water above where it is normally meeting the land. So that's a concern for folks there. Really going to put a test on those levees this weekend, the beginning of this week, I should say, as this storm approaches. And then a storm surge watch includes Mobile Bay. That spans pretty much the coastline of Alabama going to the Floribama area. So folks, if you're along this area, you're near the coastline, please keep in mind storm surge is a factor, and that would be more for a prolonged time, not just when the storm's expected to make landfall. But heading into tomorrow, we'll begin to see some of these impacts affecting the coast of Florida and these states as the storm approaches until it moves inland. So a pretty wide window of impacts, duration-wise and width-wise, along the coastline here. So this hasn't been as quite of a clear-cut forecast, because many factors in play here in the synoptics, the steering elements and all that. And Sally, of course, getting better organized, but we've needed some more information to help us fine-tune this forecast. And the National Hurricane Center is always on top of that. So the hurricane hunters have been out there. They had 2 flights in there today collecting information, and you'll notice they stayed mostly on that somewhat quieter part of the storm, that western part where you don't see a lot of clouds here on the satellite imagery. Trying to get a better feel for the environment there. That's where Sally's headed, and that's where we've seen some shear. So in the upper level of the storm, some non-friendly wind for the storm starting to shear off the tops of those thunderstorms and kind of hindering thunderstorms from developing on that western side. So they've been trying to collect some data from there, but they did find a pretty steady low pressure center just shy of 1,000 millibars. So as that pressure drops, it's indicative that the storm is strengthening, and they did find that the winds have been increasing as well as new thunderstorms have begun to bubble up just basically to the east of the center. Now you can see those thunderstorms here on the infrared satellite imagery, those richer shades of red, dark gray. That shows you where the strongest thunderstorms are. So that's what you're seeing here on this loop, and you can see a lot of it has been sheared off to the eastern side of the storm, and that's why Florida's just been getting very heavy downpours, and we've seen a better, more aesthetic looking storm with the banding features on the eastern side here as opposed to the western side. So we'll get a little more detailed into that and show you what's going on there. Oh, that's an old graphic from Laura. Sorry for that. Let's jump into that imagery once again. Here we go. Our water vapor. Love to share this one with you guys because it really helps us dig into some of the meteorology behind this storm. So those bright shades of colors, that's moisture in the atmosphere that's being picked up by the satellite. Where things are a bit more dull, say the orange areas you see here, this is drier air in the upper atmosphere, and way back here over the west coast, very dry into the upper levels of the atmosphere too. So where you see color is an abundance of moisture and storms. You might see some familiar features here. This counterclockwise, pretty obvious looking cyclone out here, that's Hurricane Paulette. That's going to be impacting Bermuda as we head into the next couple of hours here. and it will be moving out to sea. It's not a threat to the continuous U.S. here, the contiguous U.S. It's going to be impacting Bermuda and then making its way out to sea. So not a threat for us. But this group of thunderstorms that you see here, this is Sally. This is the area in question that we've had our eyes on all weekend. And then you see another familiar counterclockwise motion here. This is an area of interest that the National Hurricane Center was keeping their eyes on for development. Had a low chance, still has a very low chance of development. But the point being that it is moving away from the U.S. It is trending on a southwesterly path and will likely be moving over Mexico here as we head into the beginning of the week. But that's kind of really what's been causing some of that shear and stress on the western side of Sally, as it looks a lot more broad here with water vapor looking in the upper part of the atmosphere, but at the surface, just barely any kind of counterclockwise center being seen in the lower levels of the atmosphere. But water vapor, we're looking from the top down, so it's much more obvious on this imagery. But still, really, that's about all that's going on with this storm. It's going to continue to move southwesterly over Mexico, not a threat to the U.S., but it is helping to hinder some of that thunderstorm activity on the western side of the storm. So what is playing a role in Sally's track and intensity forecast? Well, for that, we'll move a little bit closer. I'm actually going to adjust our camera view here so it might be a little bit easier to see. We'll slide this down a little so we can see what's going on in the northern U.S., because there's a couple of features I want to point out to you that are going to help us kind of get this picture painted for us. And I'm going to use a couple different colored arrows here because this is not the simplest synoptic setup. It is somewhat complicated. So in green, I will show you, this is a trough. This is our long wave trough. That's a general depiction of it. Excuse my lack of artistic skills. But this is that cold front that's moving across the middle of the U.S. that's moving forward. It's not the strongest trough, but it is going to play a role in Sally's path as we head into the end part of its forecast. This is the reason why it's going to be making that trek towards the northeast once it moves inland and eventually swipe out to the mid-Atlantic coastline. Now, there really isn't much else directing that except one key factor, a small but mighty factor. And for that, I will zoom in a little bit closer because it's not very obvious, especially here in the upper levels. It's really found in the middle levels, which we don't really have a satellite that will do a good job of showing you that. So we're going to stick to the top of the atmosphere and look down. I will draw that here in some yellow arrows. So right around here, let's try that again. We have a ridge of high pressure. We have one that normally hangs off the coastline. I'm going to point out an interesting feature for you here in a second that kind of makes my drawing somewhat incomplete. You'll notice this counterclockwise spin right here. This is a trough of low pressure just in the upper atmosphere. So if I was showing you this ridge of high pressure in the mid part of the atmosphere, you wouldn't see this guy here. But he's here for now. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to draw around him and get my arrows back out. This is the steering mechanism that is at play, that is guiding Sally northwesterly on its path right now into the Gulf of Mexico and near the northern Gulf Coast. So what we're watching for, and the reason why the National Hurricane Center has been sending out flights into the storm and having the National Weather Service offices across the Gulf Coast launch extra soundings, instead of their normal 2, they're now launching 4 a day to get a really good analysis of what's going on with these steering mechanisms. With that, what we're watching for is for Sally to move along the periphery of this ridge here, and then it's going to kind of break off from that influence and will begin to slow down and meander a bit as it approaches the Gulf Coast. So we kind of have a window here of where we expect to see Sally go, and it's a fairly wide window in comparison. It's the reason why you see that cone of uncertainty forecast track from the National Hurricane Center span from about the middle part of Louisiana, so Sally is not a threat to Texas, and kind of goes towards the Floribama area. So this is our window that we're looking at to see the center of the storm move inland. So that's really where we're focusing for the forecast track. Now, as far as the intensity goes, again, this area of high pressure here, counterclockwise motion that's guiding Sally, how long will that take to kind of move out of the way and cause Sally to slow down and meander towards the coast. Will it happen sooner? Will it happen later? That will give a window of time for Sally to either continue intensifying or not intensify as much. So on the current forecast track, a reminder, Sally is expected to be a stronger Category 1 hurricane as it approaches the coastline, but that does not mean that if it slows down and hangs out over those warm Gulf of Mexico waters, that it couldn't intensify to a Category 2 hurricane. Right now, that's not in the National Hurricane Center's forecast. Looking at what we have going on right now and the best data we have available at the present time. So that's why the continual updates of information across the Gulf Coast of the U.S. with those soundings and the hurricane hunters flying into the storm will be critical in figuring out exactly that path and the expected intensity of Laura as it's going through. The main message here, folks along the Gulf Coast, if you are in the Big Bend of Florida, spanning out to the coastline of Louisiana, I would even say approaching the Louisiana-Texas border, but likely to the east of that, you should prepare for a storm. Storm surge is something that will impact outside, away from the center. And tropical storm force winds, we've had some tropical storm force gusts experienced and recorded along the western Florida coastline here. And in fact, we have some surfline cameras that I'd like to show you of the beach conditions out there. We got two views, one from Venice, Florida, and I believe the other one is from Englewood, Florida, both there on the southwestern Florida, south of Tampa, but north of Cape Coral, if you're familiar with that part of Florida. And just shows some of the conditions that are happening out there. Not the best beach day, but we are seeing that some of that wave activity is beginning to pick up as Sally continues to move away from the state, but further north into the Gulf of Mexico. So that means folks in the Big Bend of Florida, say near Cedar Key or up near Sopchoppy, will see conditions beginning to deteriorate today. And then overnight and then into Monday, we'll see those conditions spread further up the Gulf Coast. So folks from Panama City Beach into Pensacola, Orange Beach, Alabama, you can see the rough surf begin to impact your area going into tomorrow and Tuesday as well. So that's something that we're watching out for. I'm going to take you back to the MyRadar app. We're going to track some of these storms that have been moving through parts of the Gulf Coast here. And I'm going to take off our hurricane tracker so we can get a bit of a clearer view here. And I'm going to go to our per station feature here. Let's do that. And we'll pick up some of the storms on Tampa's radar. Yeah, bulk of that rain is remaining off the coastline, and that's some good news for folks here. But we've got some pretty heavy downpours that are beginning to move into the Cape Coral area, into Fort Myers. Of course, the red and yellow showing you where the heavier rainfall is. So that's likely going to continue into tonight. So flooding has been a concern for a lot of the Florida area here. Let me zoom out a bit. So expect these bands to continue moving onshore. If you're in the Florida area, rainfall is going to be in your forecast here heading into the beginning of the week as we see that impact from Sally. Even a couple of those bands moving on the southeast coast of Florida, where parts of the metro Miami area have seen very heavy rainfall. Again, I was telling you about that record in Key West where they had right around the neighborhood of 9 inches of rain in just a 24-hour period that was occurring yesterday. So some impressive rainfall totals coming in through that. Moving up the coastline here, I'll pick up Tallahassee's radar and you can see showers once again, that more obvious banding feature. And as we get these bands continue to move onshore, there is the threat that as we head into Monday and Tuesday, we could see the potential for some small spin-up tornadoes as these bands move onshore. They meet the friction of land. We get a couple of spin-ups, so that's something we'll have to keep in mind as the storm approaches the Gulf coastline. Today, that hasn't really been much of a concern as the storm's pretty far away, and these bands have been moving overland in a more linear fashion there, so not really dealing with the twist that we would expect to see once the center begins to reach the northern Gulf coastline. That, of course, will change. We'll have to keep our eye on that here. But some pretty heavy rainfall totals now moving into the Florida Panhandle, into parts of southern Georgia and Alabama near Dothan, Valdosta, getting some heavy rainfall. And we'll turn on this radar. I believe this is from Eglin Air Force Base. Eglin? Yes, another bend all down I-10. Heavy rainfall to be expected for folks here, even going out towards the Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Florida and Alabama borderline there. So heavy rainfall to continue going on into tonight. And We'll continue to watch Sally and see what is going to be going on with this storm. It's kind of not a sprint, a marathon, a hurry up and wait kind of situation, whereas the storm moves into the Gulf of Mexico, a very shallow, warm body of water relative to the other ocean basins around the world, so it likes to have some tricks up its sleeve. Don't worry, we got it covered for you. We're going to continue to track this storm going on tonight and bring you the latest. Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson will be in tomorrow and for the rest of the week to track the storm with you. And of course, we have the latest information in the fast forecast. If you don't live near the Gulf Coast, we still have your weather covered in the fast forecast. But just want to give you an update on Sally and what's going on with this tropical storm. Again, we'll continue to see what's going on as more data comes in. Expect another update coming in later on tonight. All right, guys, see you then.